Do you think that Nebraska's current hype is justified? Or do you think that there is a sense of hype and excitement and a desire so strongly for a program for Nebraska to be back that you and I, who are high on Nebraska, are just drinking the Kool-Aid?
Well, when you look at Nebraska, I think you have to look at Matt Rule's path as well. I'll just start out with this, then work my way over to the roster, then the schedule. Matt Rule, in his two previous jobs, it's weird to see patterns like this, but at Temple and at Baylor, year 2 was a jump. Year 3 was a jump in win totals. Year 1 was always rough. Year 1 was rough for Nebraska, but they managed to get 5 wins out of possibly the worst quarterback play I've seen in a long time, with just the turnovers and just everything. I mean, everything was just so poor coming out of that position. And now you get a bona fide starter in Dylan Raiola. You do. And he's going to start. If he doesn't start, then and Heinrich Harburg is starting, they're going to be in bad shape. But when you look at Nebraska, and Matt Rule, his teams make jumps. So I would expect with Nebraska for them to make a jump. Now, when you look at their roster, I think that their roster is one of the more complete rosters in the Big Ten. They don't have a bell cow running back, but they have 4 legitimate running backs. They have 4 legitimate wide receivers, in my opinion, if Malachi Coleman can get healthy. Their offensive line is going to be up and down, but they brought in Micah Mazuka, a higher-rated player from Florida. Their tackle, Bryce Benhart, and their center, Ben Scott, should be good. And they return a lot of the defense that really made Nebraska's season last year. They were ranked 11 or 13th, bottom line, a top 15 defense. They return a lot of that, especially at defensive line. They got a linebacker transfer, from what I remember, in Stephon Thompson, and then their secondary should be underrated as well. So when you look at this roster, it's really a really good roster. And you look at Matt Rule's trajectory, he's always going to make this year 2 jump, this year 3 jump. Not always, but they look like they are going to. And then you look at their schedule. I did a preview on Nebraska on my channel, if you want to see that. Really, you look at their schedule, and you can be conservative and say that they'll win 7 games. You look at the first 7 games, being conservative is picking them to go 6-1. I think that they, out of, just off the top of my head here, Colorado and Rutgers, I think that they go 1-1 versus them, and then they will probably win the rest of their games in their first 7 games. So you go 6-1 into an Ohio State game in which they will probably lose. Then you have teams like UCLA, which they will probably beat. Excuse me. And then your final 3 games, you already have 8 wins, and you have 7 wins, from what I'm projecting. 3 games to win 1 or 2 games, and you're there at 8 or 9. So I agree that they are trending in the right direction. Is there some unjustified hype when people say that they'll win 10 games? I think so, because I think 10 games is a little bit too much to see from a Nebraska team that just went 5-7 in such bad quarterback play. I don't think you can say that Dylan Raiola is a perfect quarterback, and he will have some struggles. He will. But especially the beginning part of that schedule, UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, all teams that don't have a secondary, especially with Colorado. The only secondary player is Travis Hunter, and he can get gassed, whatever.
And God bless him, because they play him every down.
Didn't they run some stat during the season that he ran like a bazillion yards or something like that? He ran like over 1 million yards in one game, just running back and forth.
It's insane. But generationally talented player. But part of me almost wonders, like, out of all the players to follow Deion Sanders, why would he? Because he could have went to any school in the country, and I mean, part of me gets why he went to Colorado because he'll definitely play, you know, dual positions there. He probably wouldn't
Right.
at most other
And they
schools.
need him. They need him to play dual positions because they don't have anyone else in the secondary to be
Nope.
their corner number one. They
Yeah.
don't really have wide receivers for him to not be on the field.
Yeah, they have Jimmy
Colorado is
Horn, and that's it.
we could really do a whole show on Colorado, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I can't help but not be optimistic about Nebraska. I really can't. You can't tell me that Nebraska isn't going to go bowling. You can't tell me that Nebraska is only going to have 6 wins, especially with this schedule. You try and find losses on that schedule. I challenge any one of your listeners to find 6 losses on that schedule, to find 5 losses on that schedule, because there isn't. They're going to be favored in a lot of these games. They're going to be favored in probably, depending on how the late season goes, about 8 or 9 games. But
Yeah.
anyway,
No, you brought up really, I think, really good points. The only stat that I would add to what you brought up is returning production. They're
right.
20th there. They return 71% of their production. And this isn't like they return all of their great defense or all of their bad offense, but the other side completely lacks. They're top 35 in both, and they return more than 70% of their production on both the offense and the defense. And they bring back Tristan Alvano and Brian Buschini at kicker and punter, respectively. So they have roster continuity. They're balanced on the roster. They have staff continuity. They return Marcus Satterfield and Tony White, Matt Rule, and Matt Rule even made some staff changes and upgrades that I thought were quite necessary. And they brought in a top 25 overall recruiting class. And an SP Plus, give you a sneak peek of Bill Connolly's ratings here. Nebraska's ranked fairly highly as well. Nebraska per SP Plus is 40th. Now that may not sound great, but with their schedule, I mean, playing UTEP, playing Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, at Purdue, Rutgers, bye, at Indiana, at Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa, you look at their opponents. Ohio State's second in SP Plus. You have to go all the way down to USC to find their next opponent, 21st SP Plus. Iowa's 22nd. UCLA is 26th, which I think is too high, but that's because they use priors. And Wisconsin's 27th. And all those teams, except for Ohio State, are only 6 points or less superior to Nebraska on a projected win margin on a neutral field. And Nebraska will host some of those teams. Nebraska will go on the road against some of those teams. They'll travel to play some. But they have, like you said, a fairly easy schedule, especially at the beginning, which will allow them to grow as a unit and mature before they play the Ohio States and USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa, which is really a brutal final 3-game stretch, I'd say, for anyone outside of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country. And they could be favored, don't you think, in at most 11 of their games. I mean, USC, if they're bad, and Nebraska's just buzzing, especially with their run game and defense, they could be favored over the Trojans. They could certainly be favored over Wisconsin, and they could certainly be favored over Iowa.
They could be, but especially with Iowa too, Iowa doesn't have that bad of a schedule, so I think Iowa's also going to be around where Nebraska is. They're going to get these wins that against inferior opponents. So I don't know. I think that I don't think that they're going to be favored in 11 of their games. I think they'll be favored in about 9 or 10. I think Wisconsin has a good team this year. Wisconsin, we're getting off topic here. But that'll be a very fun game to watch. I think USC's style of play is going to hurt Nebraska, especially the way that they run up points. In a secondary that got burned a little bit last year.
Great point.
I think back to the Michigan State game, Colorado game, um,
Even the Maryland game.
right? Even the Maryland game. Maryland had some good receivers. So I think USC's style of play might give them an edge. But again, these are toss-up games. These last 3 games, it's flip a coin, really, especially if all 4 teams are, including Nebraska, are doing well. That probably won't be true. USC might not be doing well. Wisconsin might have a mishap. But I just want to end with this. When it comes to Nebraska, and we talked about player development and all this other stuff beforehand with the elite teams, I think Nebraska is almost there. I think they're near elite in player development. They're already there in recruiting. So I think that their staff, they have an elite staff as well. If they can hang on to Tony White for one more year, they might be just elite flat out.
Yeah.
I mean, Tony White is such. I was so surprised when he did not get a job as a head coach. And then I think Matt Rule just is a flat out great head coach as well when it comes to college. You cannot take the Carolina Panthers and say, "Oh, look at how bad this guy is as a head coach." It's just ridiculous when people bring up Matt Rule at Carolina, because the NFL is such a different game. And yes, Nebraska is still Nebraska. I see that in the chat. But you also got to see Scott Frost is still Scott Frost and those teams. I think that you have to wipe the slate clean with Nebraska after Scott Frost, because Matt Rule is just such a different animal. He's so attention detailed oriented. And I mean, and Nebraska does a good job marketing too. They put out the videos, they put out off-season hype, which gets all of us riled up. And I mean, you look at their practices, they are working on not throwing interceptions, on not fumbling the ball. And especially with Dylan Raiola too, which he should start, he doesn't throw interceptions. So when it comes to that, especially in the spring game too, we saw some really good signs of that as well. The one interception that Raiola threw was off the receiver's hands, was not his fault. And last year, when Jeff Sims came into the game, I think he threw like 2 or 3 interceptions.
Oh.
People should have seen that coming. But Nebraska hype, as we've been saying, But anyway, I should hand this over.
No, you're good. I mean, I think you're knocking down every point very well. Very, very well. Jeff Sims, for example, it sounds like you thought entering last year that he wasn't going to be good. Is that correct?
I was bought in with the hype. I mean, Nebraska's hyped up every year. By the way, in the chat, hype does not equal results, in my opinion. I just want to make that clear. But hype does help you see what's going on with the team, especially with videos that a university puts out. Marketing. They help you see what's inside of a program. And when you look strictly at the roster, anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic. But anyway, I just think that Nebraska, they are trending in the right direction. You cannot say that they're not. You can't say that they're not trending in the right direction at this point in time. Their roster is just so well-rounded, and the schedule is just so easy for them. It's hard not to get excited.
Yeah, the only thing that I would push back on, just to steel man the argument that they aren't back, is they pivoted in their identity toward the end of last season, even when they had a good QB or a serviceable QB play against Wisconsin and Iowa. They still found ways to blow games. And their schedule, while easy, I mean, last year's schedule outside of Michigan was very easy. The West was weak, and they just couldn't take it. And whether it's Colorado, whether it's USC or Wisconsin, obviously Ohio State, but even maybe Purdue, all those teams I mentioned have quick receivers, and especially in the case of Wisconsin, USC, Colorado, and again, obviously OSU, they have deep receiver rooms. And they have at least above average to elite quarterbacks to go along with them. And that's Nebraska's nightmare, is a team that can throw over the top, that has depth at receiver, and especially in the case of USC, and I'd say Purdue with that air raid, and Wisconsin too. I mean, even Colorado, they'll love to get the ball out fairly quickly. But that's really it. I agree with you that they're trending in the right direction, and whether it's looking at Matt Rule's past resume or looking at recruiting, returning production, there's also the freshman QB element, which I'd say for most programs would be a red flag. But Raiola's very talented, and he doesn't throw picks, and he was very accurate in the spring game against a defense
He's very composed, too.
Yes.
That's what I saw out of it.
I noticed that as well. Very comfortable in the pocket. Almost has a Mahomes-like where Mahomes is always bouncing around. He's not this elite scrambler, but like he has enough elusiveness to not get sacked, basically, to keep his team on schedule. He has that. Now, Adrian Martinez started as a true freshman, but Martinez is completely different, at least in the aspect of he's a better athlete than Raiola is, way better legs, but he is not polished nearly to the same degree as Raiola is as a passer, and Raiola will probably have a better overall supporting cast than Martinez did in 2018 when he started as a true freshman.
Also, that was just a completely different offensive system as well.
That's true.
Nebraska, they didn't put people around Adrian Martinez very much. But they're putting a lot of talent around Dylan Raiola on the offensive line as well. I mean, that's what's going to help him out is if he stays upright. With the running backs, they have 4 legitimate running backs.
Yeah, Dowdle,
they do.
Johnson, Irvin Jr., and
then
Johnson again.
Right, the Johnson and Johnson bros. But like I said, all of them aren't elite, but put together, they make an elite running back room, in my opinion. The wide receivers looked really good in the spring game. I mean, this offense looks to be really good. Yeah, and the final point I will say, when you talked about those air raid offenses, if the one point though is that Nebraska's defensive line will be really, really good.
That's true.
And they will get to the quarterback. So if Colorado can get the ball out quickly, if Purdue can get the ball out quickly, yes, they will have some success on this defense. But if they hold the ball, like Shedeur Sanders got sacked 8 or 9 times against Nebraska's defense. Hudson Card last year with Purdue, this was last year, had a very tough time because he held the ball for a second too long, and Nebraska's defense was right there. Nash Hutmacher on the interior, Ty Robinson, Jamari Butler, Prince Willem Yellen. I mean, lots of talented guys.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Hutmacher is he's an elite defensive tackle, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally. I think that I think we covered that very well. I mean, if you think Nebraska is pure Kool-Aid and hype yet again, I respectfully disagree. I understand where you're coming from, but look at this team. Even if you think they're overhyped, there is some truth to the hype, because I think you look at everything, whether it's their schedule, how the teams on their schedule are projected to do, or what's just going on with Nebraska as a period alone, as a program, alone, you'll see that they're getting better. And I'd say their floor this year is going bowling. Thank you all so much for watching this clip of Touchdown Talk. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your reaction down below. That way College Football with Sam can continue to grow and you can get the best experience out of college football content on YouTube. I would like to give a shout out to my Patreon members for sponsoring this channel and video. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane and Connor Little OH for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you back soon. Bye-bye.